Book 12. Now when our ship had left the stream of the ocean river, and come back to the wide crossing of the sea's waves, and to the island of Aiaia, where lies the house of the early dawn, her dancing spaces, and where Helios the sun makes his uprising, making this point, we ran our ship to the sand and beached her, and we ourselves stepped out onto the break of the sea beach. And there we fell asleep, and waited for the divine dawn. But when the young dawn showed again with her rosy fingers, then I sent my companions away to the house of Circe, to bring back the body of Elpenor, who died there. Then we cut logs, and where the extreme of the foreland jutted out, we buried him, sorrowful, shedding warm tears for him. But when the dead man had burned, and the dead man's armor, piling the grave mound, and pulling the gravestone to stand above it, we planted the well-shaped oar in the very top of the grave mound. So we were busy, each with our various work, nor was Circe unaware that we had come back from Hades. Presently she came attired, and her attendants following carried bread at her will, and many meats, and the shining red wine. Bright among goddesses, she stood in our midst and addressed us. Unhappy men, who went alive to the house of Hades, so dying twice, when all the rest of mankind die only once. Come then, eat what is there, and drink your wine, staying here all the rest of the day, and then tomorrow, when the dawn shows, you shall sail. And I will show you the way, and make plain all details, so that neither by land nor in the salt water you may suffer, and come to grief by unhappy bad designing. So she spoke, and the proud heart in us was persuaded. So for the whole length of the day until the sun setting, we sat there feasting on unlimited meat and sweet wine. But when the sun went down and the sacred darkness came over, the men lay down to all sleep by the ship's stern cables. But she, taking me by the hand, made me sit down away from my dear companions, and talked with me, and asked me the details of everything, and I recited all just as it had happened. Then the queenly Circe spoke in words and addressed me. So all that has been duly done. Listen now, I will tell you all, but the very God himself will make you remember. You will come first of all to the sirens, who are enchanters of all mankind and whoever comes their way. And that man who unsuspecting approaches them and listens to the sirens singing has no prospects of coming home and delighting his wife and little children as they stand about him in greeting. But the sirens by the melody of their singing enchant him. They sit in their meadow, but the beach before it is piled with the bone heaps of men, now rotted away, and the skin shrivels upon them. You must drive straight on past, but melt down the sweet wax of honey, and with it stop your companions' ears, so none can listen. The rest, that is, but if you yourself are wanting to hear them, then have them tie your hand and foot on the fast ship, standing upright against the mast, and with ropes lashed around it, so you can have joy in hearing the song of the sirens. But if you supplicate your men and implore them to set you free, they must tie you fast with even more lashings. Then, for the time when your companions have driven you past them, for that time I will no longer tell you in detail which way of the two your course must lie, but you yourself must consider this in your mind. I will tell you the two ways of it. On the one side there are overhanging rocks, and against them crash the heavy swell of the dark-eyed amphitrite. The blessed gods called these rocks the rovers. By this way, not even any flying thing, not even the tremulous doves, which carry ambrosia to Zeus the Father, can pass through. But every time the sheer rock catches away one even of these, but the Father then adds another to keep the number right. No ship of men that came here ever has fled through, but the waves of the sea and storms of ravening fire carry away together the ship's timbers and the men's bodies. That way, the only sea-going ship to get through was Argo, who is in all men's minds on her way home from Aeetes. And even she would have been driven on the great rocks that time, but Hera saw her through, out of her great love for Jason. But of the two rocks, one reaches up into the wide heaven with a pointed peak, and a dark cloud stands always around it, and never at any time draws away from it, nor does the sunlight ever hold that peak, either in the early or the late summer. Nor could any man who is mortal climb there, or stand mounted on the summit, not if he had 20 hands and 20 feet, for the rock goes sheerly up, as if it were polished. Halfway up the cliff there is a cave, misty-looking, and turned toward Erebos, and the dark, the very direction from which, O shining Odysseus, you and your men will be steering your hollow ship, and from the hollow ship no vigorous young man with a bow could shoot to that hole in the cliffside. In that cavern Scylla lives, whose howling is terror. Her voice, indeed, is only as loud as a newborn puppy could make, but she is herself an evil monster. No one, not even a god encountering her, could be glad at that sight. She has 12 feet, and all of them wave in the air. She has 6 necks upon her, grown to great length, and upon each neck there is a horrible head with teeth in it, set in 3 rows, close together and stiff, full of black death. Her body from the waist down is holed up inside the hollow cavern, but she holds her head poked out and away from the terrible hollow. And there she fishes, peering all over the cliffside, looking for dolphins or dogfish to catch, or anything bigger. Some sea monster of whom Amphitrite keeps so many. Never can sailors boast aloud that their ship has passed her without any loss of men. For with each of her heads she snatches one man away and carries him off from the dark proud vessel. The other cliff is lower. You will see it, Odysseus, for they lie close together, and you could even cast with an arrow across. There is a great fig tree grows there, dense with foliage, and under this shining Charybdis sucks down the black water. For 3 times a day she flows it up, and 3 times she sucks it down terribly. May you not be there when she sucks down water, for not even the Earth-shaker could rescue you out of that evil. But sailing your ship swiftly, drive her past and avoid her, and make for Scylla's rock instead, since it is far better to mourn 6 friends lost out of your ship than the whole company. So she spoke, but I, in turn, said to her in answer, Come then, goddess, answer me truthfully this. Is there some way for me to escape away from deadly Charybdis, and yet fight the other one off when she attacks my companions? So I spoke, and she, shining among goddesses, answered, Hardy man, your mind is full forever of fighting and battle worth. Will you not give way even to the immortals? She is no immortal thing, but a mischief immortal, dangerous, difficult, and bloodthirsty, and there is no fighting against her, nor any force of defense. It is best to run away from her, for if you arm for battle beside her rock and waste time there, I fear she will make another outrush and catch you with all her heads and snatch away once more the same number of men. Drive by as hard as you can, but invoke Crates. She is the mother of Scylla and bore this mischief for mortals, and she will stay her from making another sally against you. Then you will reach the island of Thrinacia, where are pastured the cattle and fat sheep of the sun god Helios, 7 herds of oxen, and as many beautiful sheep flocks, and 50 to each herd. There is no giving birth among them, nor do they ever die away, and their shepherdesses are gods, nymphs with sweet hair, Lampetia and Phaethusa, whom shining Neaera bore to Hyperion, the sun god. These, when their queenly mother had given them birth and reared them, she settled into the island Thrinacia, far away, to live there and guard their father's sheep and his horn-curved cattle. Then, if you keep your mind on homecoming and leave these unharmed, you might all make your way to Ithaca after much suffering. But if you do harm them, then I testify to the destruction of your ship and your companions. But if you yourself get clear, you will come home in bad case with the loss of all your companions. So she spoke, and dawn of the golden throne came on us. She, shining among the goddesses, went away up the island. Then, going back on board my ship, I told my companions also to go aboard and to cast off the stern cables, and quickly they went on board the ship and sat to the oarlocks. And sitting well in the order, dashed the oars in the grey sea. But fair-haired Circe, the dread goddess who talks with mortals, sent us an excellent companion, a following wind, filling the sails to carry from astern the ship with the dark prow. We ourselves, over all the ship, making fast the running gear, sat there, and let the wind and the steersman hold her steady. Just then, sorrowful as I was, I spoke and told my companions, Friends, since it is not right for 1 or 2 of us only to know the divinations that Circe, bright among goddesses, gave me, so I will tell you. And knowing all, we may either die or turn aside from death and escape destruction. First of all, she tells us to keep away from magical sirens and their singing and their flowery meadow. But only I, she said, was to listen to them. But you must tie me hard in hurtful bonds to hold me fast in position, upright against the mast, with the rope's ends fastened around it. But if I supplicate you and implore you to set me free, then you must tie me fast with even more lashings. So, as I was telling all the details to my companions, meanwhile the well-made ship was coming rapidly closer to the Siren's Isle, for the harmless wind was driving her onward. But immediately then the breeze dropped, and a windless calm fell there, and some divinity stilled the tossing waters. My companions stood up and took the sails down, and stowed them away in the hollow hull, and took their places for rowing, and with their planed oar-blades whitened the water. Then I, taking a great wheel of wax with the sharp bronze, cut a little piece off, and rubbed it together in my heavy hands, and soon the wax grew softer under the powerful stress of the sun, and the heat, and the light of Hyperion's lordling. One after another I stopped the ears of all my companions, and they then bound me hand and foot in the fast ship, standing upright against the mast with the rope's ends lashed around it. And sitting then to row, they dashed their oars in the grey sea. But when we were as far from the land as a voice shouting carries, lightly plying the swift ship as it drew nearer, was seen by the Sirens, and they directed their sweet song towards us. Come this way, honored Odysseus, great glory of the Achaeans, and stay your ships, that you can listen here to our singing. For no one else has ever sailed past this place in his black ship until he has listened to the honey-sweet voice that issues from our lips. Then goes on, well pleased, knowing more than ever he did, for we know everything that the Argives and the Trojans did and suffered in wide Troy, through the gods' despite. Over all the generous earth we know everything that happens. So they sang in sweet utterance, and the heart within me desired to listen, and I signaled my companions to set me free, nodding with my brows. But they leaned on and rowed hard, and Perimedes and Eurylochus, rising up straightway, fastened me with even more lashings and squeezed me tighter. But when they had rowed on past the Sirens, and we could no longer hear their voices, and lost the sound of their singing, presently my eager companions took away from their ears the beeswax with which I had stopped them. Then they set me free from my lashings. But after we had left the island behind, the next thing we saw was smoke and a heavy surf, and we heard it thundering. The men were terrified, and they let the oars fall out of their hands, and these banged all about in the wash. The ship stopped still, with the men no longer rowing to keep way on her. Then I, going up and down the ship, urged my companions, standing beside each man and speaking to him in kind words. Dear friends, surely we are not unlearned in evils. This is no greater evil now than it was when Cyclops had us cooped in his hollow cage by force and violence. But even there, by my courage and counsel and my intelligence, we escaped away. I think that all this will be remembered some day too. Then do as I say. Let us all be won over. Sit well, all of you, to your oarlocks, and dash your oars deep into the breaking surf of the water. So in that way Zeus might grant that we get clear of this danger and flee away from it. For you, steersmen, I have this order, so store it deeply in your mind, as you control the steering oar of this hollow ship. You must keep her clear from where the smoke and the breakers are, and make hard for the sea rock, lest, without your knowing, she might drift that way, and you bring all of us into disaster. So I spoke, and they quickly obeyed my words. I had not yet spoken of Scylla, a plague that could not be dealt with, for fear my companions might be terrified and give over their rowing and take cover inside the ship. For my part, I let go from my mind the difficult instruction that Circe had given me, for she told me not to be armed for combat. But I put on my glorious armor, and taking up 2 long spears in my hand, I stood bestriding the vessel's foredeck at the prow, for I expected Scylla of the rocks to appear first from that direction, she who brought pain to my companions. I could not make her out anywhere, and my eyes grew weary from looking everywhere on the misty face of the sea rock. So we sailed up the narrow strait, lamenting. On the one side was Scylla, and on the other side was shining Charybdis, who made her terrible ebb and flow of the sea water. When she vomited it up like a cauldron over a strong fire, the whole sea would boil up in turbulence, and the foam, flying, spattered the pinnacles of the rocks in either direction. But when in turn again she sucked down the sea's salt water, the turbulence showed all the inner sea, and the rock around it groaned terribly, and the ground showed at the sea's bottom, black with sand, and green fear seized upon my companions. We, in fear of destruction, kept our eyes on Charybdis. But meanwhile Scylla, out of the hollow vessel, snatched 6 of my companions, the best of them for strength and hands' work. And when I turned to look at the ship with my other companions, I saw their feet and hands from below, already lifted high above me. And they cried out to me and called me by name, the last time they ever did it, in heart's sorrow, high above me, in heart's sorrow. And as a fisherman with very long rod on a jutting rock will cast his treacherous bait for the little fishes, and sink the horn of a field-ranging ox into the water, then hauls them up and throws them on the dry land, gasping and struggling. So they gasped and struggled as they were hoisted up the cliff. Right in her doorway she ate them up. They were screaming and reaching out their hands to me in this horrid encounter. That was the most pitiful scene that these eyes have looked on in my suffering as I explored the routes over the waters. Now, when we had fled away from the rocks and dreaded Charybdis and Scylla, Next we made our way to the excellent island of the god, where ranged the handsome, wide-browed oxen and many fat flocks of sheep, belonging to the sun-god Hyperion. While I was on the black ship, still out on the open water, I heard the lowing of the cattle as they were driven home, and the bleating of sheep, and my mind was struck by the saying of the blind prophet, Tiresias the Theban, and also Aeneas Circe. Both had told me many times over to avoid the island of Helios, who brings joy to mortals. Then, sorrowful as I was, I spoke and told my companions, "Listen to what I say, my companions, though you are suffering evils, while I tell you the prophecies of Tiresias and Aeneas Circe. Both have told me many times over to avoid the island of Helios, who brings joy to mortals, for there they spoke of the most dreadful disaster that awaited for us. So drive the black ship onward and past the island." So I spoke, and the inward heart in them was broken. At once Eurylochus answered me with a bitter saying, "You are a hard man, Odysseus. Your force is greater, your limbs never wear out. You must be made all of iron. When you will not let your companions, worn with hard work and wanting sleep, set foot on this land, where if we did on the sea-girt island we could once more make ready a greedy dinner. But you force us to blunder along, just as we are through the running night, driven from the island over the misty face of the water. In the nights the hard storm winds arise, and they bring damage to ships. How could any of us escape sheer destruction if suddenly there rises the blast of a storm from the bitter blowing of the south wind or the west wind, who beyond others hammer a ship apart, in despite of the gods our masters? But now let us give way to the Black Knight's persuasion. Let us make ready our evening meal, remaining close by our fast ship, and at dawn we will go aboard and put forth onto the wide sea." So spoke Eurylochus, and my other companions assented. I saw then what evil the divinity had in mind for us, and so I spoke aloud to him and addressed him in winged words. "Eurylochus, I am only one man. You force me to it. But come then, all of you, swear a strong oath to me, that if we come upon some herd of cattle or on some great flock of sheep, no one of you in evil and reckless action will slaughter any ox or sheep. No, rather than this, eat at your pleasure of the food immortal Circe provided." So I spoke, and they all swore me the oath that I asked them. But after they had sworn me the oath and made an end of it, we beached the well-made ship inside of the house, hollow harbor, close to the sweet water, and my companions disembarked also from the ship and expertly made the evening meal ready. But when they had put away their desire for eating and drinking, they remembered, and they cried for their beloved companions, whom Scylla had caught out of the hollow ship and eaten. And on their crying a quiet sleep descended. But after the third part of the night had come, and the star changes, Zeus, the cloud-gatherer, let loose on us a gale that blustered in a supernatural storm, and huddled under the cloud scuds, land alike, and the great water. Night sprang from heaven, but when the young dawn showed again with her rosy fingers, we berthed our ship, dragging her into a hollow sea cave, where the nymphs had their beautiful dancing places and sessions. Then I held an assembly and spoke my opinion before them. "Friends, since there is food and drink stored in the fast ship, let us then keep our hands off the cattle, for fear that something may befall us. These are the cattle and fat sheep of a dreaded god, Helios, who sees all things and listens to all things." So I spoke, and the proud heart in them was persuaded. But the south wind blew for a whole month long, nor did any other wind befall after that, but only the south and east wind. As long as they still had food to eat and red wine, the men kept their hands off the cattle, striving as they were for sustenance. Then, when all the provisions that had been in the ship had given out, they turned to hunting, forced to it, and went ranging after fish and birds, anything that they could lay hands on, and with curved hooks, for their hunger was exhausting their stomachs. Then I went away along the island in order to pray to the gods, if any of them might show me some course to sail on. But when, crossing the isle, I had left my companions behind, I washed my hands, where there was a place sheltered from the wind, and prayed to all the gods whose hold is Olympus. But what they did was to shed a sweet sleep on my eyelids, and Eurylochus put an evil counsel before his companions. "Listen to what I say, my companions. Though you are suffering evils, all deaths are detestable for wretched mortals, but hungry is the sorriest way to die and encounter fate. Come then, let us cut out the best of Helios' cattle, and sacrifice them to immortals who hold wide heavens. And if we ever come back to Ithaca, land of our fathers, presently we will build a rich temple to the sun god Helios, Hyperion, and store it with many dedications, many and good. But if in anger over his high-horned cattle he wishes to wreck our ship and the rest of the gods stand by him, I had far rather gulp the waves and lose my life in them once and for all than be pinched to death on this desolate island. So spoke Eurylochus, and the other companions assented at once, cutting out from near at hand the best of Helios' cattle, for the handsome, broad-faced, horn-curved oxen were pasturing there, not far from the dark-prowed ship. Driving these, they stationed themselves around them, and made their prayers to the gods, pulling tender leaves from a deep-leaved oak tree, for they had no white barley left on the strong-beached vessel. When they had made their prayer and slaughtered the oxen and skinned them, they cut away the meat from the thighs and wrapped them in fat, making a double fold, and laid shreds of flesh upon them. And since they had no wine to pour on the burning offerings, they made a libation of water, and roasted all of the entrails. But when they had burned the thigh pieces and tasted the vitals, they cut all the remainder into pieces and spitted them. At that time the quiet sleep was lost from my eyelids, and I went back down to my fast ship and the sand of the seashore. But on my way, as I was close to the oar-swept vessel, this pleasant savour of cooking meat came drifting around me, and I cried out my grief aloud to the gods immortal. Father Zeus, and you other everlasting and blessed gods, with a pitiless sleep you lulled me to my confusion, and my companions, staying here, dared a deed that was monstrous. Lampetia of the light robes ran swift with the message to Hyperion, the sun god, that we had killed his cattle, and angered at the heart, he spoke forth among the immortals. Father Zeus, and you other everlasting and blessed gods, punish the companions of Odysseus, son of Laertes, for they outrageously killed my cattle, in whom I was delighted, and on my way up into the starry heaven, or when I turn back again from the heaven towards earth. Unless these are made to give me just recompense for my cattle, I will go down to Hades and give my light to the dead men. Then in turn Zeus, who gathers the clouds, answered him, Helios, shine on as you do among the immortals and mortal men all over the grain-giving earth. For my part, I will strike these men's fast ship midway to the open wine-blue sea with a shining bolt and dash it to pieces. All this I heard afterwards from fair-haired Calypso, and she told me she herself had heard it from the guide Hermes. But when I came back again to the ship and the seashore, they all stood about and blamed each other, but we were not able to find any remedy, for the oxen were already dead. The next thing was that the gods began to show forth portents before us. The skins crawled, and the meat that was stuck on the spits bellowed, both roast and raw, and the noise was like lowing of cattle. 6 days thereafter my own eager companions feasted on the cattle of Helios the sun god, cutting the best ones out. But when Zeus the son of Cronos established the 7th day, then at last the wind ceased from its stormy blowing, and presently we went aboard and put forth on the wide sea, and set the mast upright, and hoisted the white sails on it. But after we had left the island, and there was no more land in sight, but only the sky and sea, then Cronian Zeus drew on a blue-black cloud, and settled it over the hollow ship. And the open sea was darkened beneath it, and she ran on, but not for a very long time, as suddenly a screaming west wind came upon us, stormily blowing, and the blast of the storm wind snapped both the forestays that were holding the mast, and the mast went over backwards, and all the running gear collapsed in the wash, and at the stern of the ship the mast pole crashed down on the steersman's head and pounded to pieces all the bones of his head, so that he, like a diver, dropped from the high deck, and the proud life left his bones there. Zeus, with thunder and lightning together, crashed on our vessel, and struck by the thunderbolt of Zeus, she spun in a circle, and all was full of brimstone. My men were thrown in the water, bobbing like sea crows. They were washed away on their running waves all around the black ship, and the god took away their homecoming. But I went on my way through the vessel to where the high seas had worked the keel free out of the hull, and the bare keel floated on the swell, which had broken the mast off at the keel. Yet still there was a backstay made out of oxhide fastened to it. With this I lashed together both keel and mast, then rowed the two of them, while the deadly storm winds carried me. After this the west wind ceased from its stormy blowing, and the south wind came swiftly on, bringing to my spirit grief that I must measure the whole way back to Charybdis. All that night I was carried along, and with sun rising I came to the sea rock of Scylla, the dreaded Charybdis. At this time Charybdis sucked down the sea's salt water, but I reached high in the air above me to where the tall fig tree grew, and caught hold of it and clung like a bat. There was no place where I could firmly brace my feet or climb up it, for the roots of it were far above me, and the branches hung out far, big and long branches that overshadowed Charybdis. Inexorably I hung on, waiting for her to vomit the keel and mast back up again. I longed for them, and they came late, at the time when a man leaves the law court for dinner, after judging the many disputes brought him by litigious young men. That was the time it took the timbers to appear from Charybdis. Then I let go my hold with hands and feet and dropped off and came crashing down between and missing the two long timbers. But I mounted these, and with both hands I paddled my way out. But the Father of gods and men did not let Scylla see me again, or could not have escaped from sheer destruction. From there I was carried along 9 days, and on the 10th night the gods brought me to the island of Ogygia, the home of Calypso, who with the lovely hair and a dreaded goddess who talks with mortals. She befriended me and took care of me. Why tell the rest of this story again, since yesterday in your house I told it to you and your majestic wife? It is hateful to me to tell a story over again when it has been well told.